What I'm going to do now is going to be a recap for the previous round. Any questions you guys have for today's games, we'll do a little bit live watching after I've done my recap, and we can do that. But let's do a recap of yesterday's games. It was an amazing round. I have never seen anything like this. All games were decisive. All games were decisive. Absolutely incredible show, to be honest. All right, let's start with the battle between two Indian players. I think Gukesh made some psychological choices in this game, and he forced Prague to play outside of his comfort zone. So bishop b4 check, knight c3 is like Prague is trying to prove that he is just as great at dynamic play as he is in the strategic play. So we'll see that this is a debatable statement. Yeah. So e4, a6. The whole point is that white sacrifices a pawn for the central influence. However, this pawn on c4 is actually pretty important. It gives black access to a lot of squares. The pawn structure is good, and also it's very close to be considered the central pawn. Any white pawn breaks here are mitigated by the presence of this pawn, which gives solid blockade on the d6 square. Also, black pieces are well developed, so I don't think white has enough compensation for the sacrificed pawn here, actually. So let's see how the battle continues. d5, white goes e5, sacrifice second pawn. So he makes his intentions very clear. He is going for the throat, he is going for the attack. So it's going to be, and he sacrifices the third pawn, which is kind of a little bit probably too much. Yeah, knight d4, knight f5 with idea of f5 looks very reasonable. Probably he was concerned about this g6 move, and then you have something like this. But the thing is, if you do that, then white has the possibility to play this move, which is also only takes one pawn back, and black still has more pawns. Yeah, he still has another extra pawn. So so knight d4 again. You know, black has two extra pawns, including the central pawns. So e6, f5 is played. Taking on e6 is also not a bad choice, but he was probably worried that white will be able to attack it with a bishop, another bishop, and then if white recaptures this pawn with this open e-file, things might get a little bit murky. So f5 is human, but it gives white sort of a little chance for strong tactical play based on the knight d7, knight f7 axis, and the fact that this pawn is very dangerous to be allowed to remain alive. So knight f6, perfect. Black develops his pieces, protects his pawn center. c6. It was debatable whether black can just play c5 and d4. c6 is kind of a little bit passive, also allows white to recapture one of his sacrificed pawns. So now we have 2 versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the queen side, versus white has 4 versus 2 on the king side. But this knight is a little bit out of the game. This knight in the center, beautiful knight, knight goes to f7. The only problem is that this bishop is really stuck here, and white really needs to have another pawn on f5 as fast as possible. So that's what I think should be played. Also, another idea is to bring this knight into the game by playing knight f4. Try to protect this pawn, of course, but also bring it closer to the black king. And also knight on f4 keeps some options of sacrificing stuff. So this position is very complicated. Again, black has everything protected. Pieces are beautifully coordinated. White doesn't have any clear breakthrough plan. So the only plan is like white has to, go and sack stuff here, but it's not easy to work. Queen e8, black just continues his strategy of protecting everything, avoiding all the tempos. Knight f7, probably a bit premature. I think rook e1 going and making the play for protecting this pawn, and making a play that this pawn severely restricts black pieces probably is correct, which includes rook f e1. and then again potentially f4, f5. I think white can get the rook to e1 and pawn to f5, then actually white will have a superior game, because then a lot of possibilities with g4, g5 and attacking stuff can happen. Plus, it's not so easy for black to, get the central pawns moving, which is why the computer plays knight b3, probably wants to play a5, b4, but that's pretty slow. Knight f7 allows black a chance to deal with this knight by attacking this pawn. He can also sack the exchange, and black has a very comfortable game, but Gukish plays bishop c8. And we see that he has the plan to get this knight going to d8. Suddenly this knight, which was on the sideline, is now trading this mega super important knight that white have. I think it's a great idea. Bishop g5, white is preparing for the piece sacrifices, right? Rook's in the center, but the question is, will that be enough or not? And rook a7 apparently is not the greatest move, according to the engine. Should play knight c5, attacking the pawn. Potentially knight goes to d3 and forces the sack. But again, rook a7, yeah. I understand this move. The rook goes to the 7th to protect the king, and bishop f6, pretty much forced. So this is all forced. Otherwise, white is just strategically lost, and bishop goes to e7. And now white has a chance to make a draw. All right. The reason it is a draw is because after knight h6, you cannot capture this knight because there is a check. And if king h8, then there is check on d4, and you lose this rook. The only way for black to play would be to play bishop g5, and then white has obviously h4, and we're gonna have run into probably this line where black has to calculate rook g7. Apparently the computer thinks white has an inferior game and black is better because he defended against the attack. And if there is any trades here, king is safe. The bishop and knight are very safe. All the entry point squares for white rooks are taken, and white king is potentially facing a counter attack. If the bishop gets to b7, knight to g5, the knight f3 threat will be the end of the game. But it's still quite a few tempes. This pawn is still alive, and it's not easy for black to take this guy. Okay, a4 is a fantastic idea. White foresees that black has to utilize the queen to recapture this pawn, which means that queen takes over the defense from this pawn. And yeah, and queen e5, h4, again, presence of the rooks, rook d6, finally, it's just massive trades and a draw. All right, but this is a very difficult line to evaluate and to actually see. But this is the way white could have, played and hold the balance. All right. He plays queen g4 immediately, but after knight d8, this knight now controls the square. There is no more knight h6, knight f7 repetition, and black is better. So he trades after bishop d8. Now it's obvious that black is winning. He has extra minor piece for literally only one pawn, not near enough, and this position is completely winning for black. So white's attack fizzled out, and black just has to find some moves, and he wins the game. All right, so Prague didn't play too precisely. He missed his chance to obtain a very close to draw position. Again, I think he changed his style of play. That was not the great idea to try it in the candidates. If you want to try to change your style, you should try and build it over the period of several tournaments, a couple of years. If you're very good with the strategic chess, solid style, then you should just play it that way. Because if you suddenly change your style, it's very hard to play then at your best chess. But we'll see. All right. So next game, there was this Vidit game versus Nakamura. Those of you who have watched my live commentary of the game, I was very disappointed with Nakamura's preparation level because, they said that c6 is a novelty, but okay, it's not like a killer novelty where you sacrifice something and then there is immediately a long analytic line, computer line, and which is forced and you lose. Yeah, This is the sort of novelty which equalizes for black. Apparently white can take on c5, take on d6. So it's not a killer novelty, right? It's like a novelty in the sense that the black has an additional resource to try to equalize in this position. So white has a choice to play bishop a4, bishop d3. I'm a fan of bishop a4 because then position just goes into the Italian ways. Bishop d3 is more of a London system stuff, but compared to the London, black knight goes to g6. So it's more Italian actually. And now I was pretty shocked with this decision. He spent a lot of time. Obviously, if your opponent came up with this novelty, he knows this line, right? And why would you want to test your opponent in the engine approved and analyzed line, right? So just go make a draw if you're not so sure, or play knight a3, play develop pieces, and just play the game. Instead, he goes into knight e5 and he goes into the sharp stuff. And obviously, bishop h3 is the only move. There are no other moves for black, otherwise you just lose the pawn for nothing. So bishop h3 is the only move. And now you can see that black is fully developed. King is now very vulnerable. Gameplay for black is very easy. So this knight e5 was like really risky decision. I think it was wrong just choice. Instead of going for very solid position for white. The standard procedure for a professional player, if you're facing a novelty, just to be very solid and analyze this novelty later and admit it that you're not winning the game, but you don't have to lose the game. All right. So the whole point of this bishop h3 is that after you take, there is queen b8. If the knight returns, there is this check. All right, and black wins the game because if you play king g1, there is knight g4 and mate's coming. Yeah, bishop c7, rook d8, rook g6. But if you play knight h2, now black plays this, and this is pinned. So if you have to play f3, again, black can just play knight h5, knight g6, there's free attack, this queen is unstoppable together with this bishop, so the game is just completely lost for white. So knight h5, the threat of mate, is pretty much in the end. So the only way for white to defend it would be to play bishop f4, then black plays bishop c7, the knight is lost, and the only question, what is this position? And again, it seems like white is doing okay, but black is actually doing just quite well, because these pawns are hanging pawns and black knights are very good dealing with these guys together with the check, potential rook d8. The bishop is really bad placed. The bishop should be on g2 in this position. And white knight, by the time white gets his pieces into the play and gets his bishops rolling, it is possible in this position for white to get an advantage, but you need to be playing absolutely precisely, and I'm sure we did analyze this to the equality. All right. But if you don't take this bishop, then your king is just bad. So Naka refuses to take this line, and he gets into a bad position because his king is way open, easy for black to play. b5, knight g6, knight h5, queen is coming. The position is just bad, so he goes for this super line. Knight d7 is not even the most accurate move, but still advantage for black. Now the pawn is under attack. If you play f4, this is going to be just g6. And again, all these pieces are very confusing. You try to play knight d2, it's knight f5, and the threat is b5. This knight is really badly placed, because if you play something like knight e3, there is bishop b6, and white is completely pinned in every possible way. Still probably playable. Yeah, still playable. But of course, yeah, knight c5 is just a killer move, because you lose this bishop. Bishop has no moves, and if you have to trade the bishop, then not immediately, save time, knight f5 first. I think knight e4 is also advantage, but the engine actually says knight e6. And the idea is that, again, you don't have the h-pawn. Any check followed by queen h4 check is deadly. All right. So Naka takes on h7, king h8, and he goes back, but knight e5, and black has free attack. Knight bishop e2 is probably the losing move. You really had to take on g4. But I'm pretty sure he was very upset at this point, and he thought this position was bad. But you know, this is bad, but this is definitely better than this, because after this, white is just completely lost. Yeah. Now the rook joins the game. This bishop is untouchable. Again, queen b6, queen h4 is coming. Knight on e3 is terribly placed. The game is lost. f4 just loses this sort of immediately, but it's already pretty bad. Queen g5. Black is fully developed, attacking the king. This is still stuck here. So really, it's not about like Vidit winning this game. It's more about Naka self-destructing actually. He faced the novelty. He decided to go a risky way, knowing that your opponent analyzed this with the engine. So it was really a bad decision, strategic decision-making process. Okay, and he took the risk, but the risk didn't pay off. This is not Title Tuesday. This is not a blitz game. All right, in the blitz game, Title Tuesdays, yes, you can take that risk because you can. Your opponent doesn't have much time. Even if he's in his prep, you can always, like, that prep certainly ends at some point, or you can make a move which your opponent didn't look, and sort of you can play using the time factor. Yeah, but in the classical game where people have lots of time, and you know, they really analyze stuff well, they know the ideas, you know, they're gonna spend some time. You know, at the end, Vidit ended up with 21 minutes. So he spent those hour and something to find all these critical moves, right? Like he found this f5, and then he spent a lot of time on this line, yeah, b5, 95. So he spent time really well, finding the best continuations to create these threats. All right. Not a blitz game. So this was absolutely madhouse. This was absolutely crazy game. Spanish, Berlin, anti-Berlin with d5, which is pretty fashionable. And obviously Nepo analyzed this and he created surprise for Alireza. Both players play pretty fast, but at some point somebody's analysis ends, and I think you know, white sacks the pawn, but he gets the bishop. This is very important bishop. The threat is knight fg5 and also a5 to put black pieces on the defensive, so black has to go this and play this, and queen d7 is correct. Black has extra pawn if he managed to play king h8 f5 and get the knights back coordinate, then black is better. But the problem is that, you know, white has this very strong bishop and potential attack. And again, this very, very strong bishop, because this knight is really bad and this knight is not that great. So white has dynamic compensation for the pawn. I think it's really complicated to play this position as black because he's very passive, he needs to be precise. But, you know, Alireza does his job. He finds good moves. He finds this very important move, g5, not g6, which is very passive, but g5, because, you know, later you might need this access to the square for the queen. Knight d6 or f5. There's a suggestion to play f5 and e4 immediately to try to open up the white king, and then queen h5 and rook comes. So this is a very interesting idea, but Alireza plays knight d6. He wants to bring the knight to f5, complete the coordination, and play f6. Looks very good, right? Bishop b2 and knight f5. So knight f5, I think, was a critical mistake. You should actually play rook d8 first and not allow the queen to get very active, because in the end it was that queen on d7 which wreaked havoc on black's position. Okay, so rook d8, bringing the rook, closing this file, and then f6, playing very solidly, and then you play knight f5, knight h4 would be great for black. And after queen d7 is the position went immediately back into very unclear. With this queen being active, all the endgames are good for white despite being pawned down, because presence again of this very strong bishop, pressure on this king, really vulnerable, you know, pawn structure for black. So check f5 is the only way to play. Alireza finds it. He takes this pawn as well, but you know, b5, and now this knight is chased from this important position where he protects a lot of pieces, squares, protects the king. Now the knight is chased to a5, Very unfortunate position. He plays f4 first, but I don't really like f4 because now this knight on g3 is not that great, but after f4, knight gets to this fantastic position where he can join white's potential attack. He also takes a lot of squares and there is no mate. Okay, I'm pretty sure Alireza wanted to play queen h5 here, that's why he played f4, but now he changed his mind and he plays knight a5. But I think that's just wrong. And again, like in the game with Gugish and Prague, right? Prague had a chance to make an equal position, and here was a chance for wait, queen h5, check, 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 right? If king e2, then check, and queen e2, right? So this is equal, right? So that was the draw, okay? And he should have taken it. So he plays for a win, but you know, when you put the knight on the rim after bishop a2, bishop e6 is actually even stronger. Now the bishop can access the g4 square, and he controls the h3 square. Yeah. So this is the critical position where black has to be very, very precise and must avoid the danger of falling into worse position. And he plays queen g6, after which he is lost tactically. Okay, because queen e7. You cannot play rook e8 because check and bishop is safe. You must take here, but bishop f7, another precise move, stops rook e8, takes away the key square from the queen in case of check, check, and white has extra piece. So this position is pretty much lost. Strong pair of bishops, extra piece, fantastic centralized knight, knight on the rim. This knight is also on the rim. The king is surprisingly is very, very safe, and now this file is actually going to be used by white to attack the black king, right? So rook e8, but just take the pawn. Now this knight is in prize. Queen g4, king moves forwards. King is very, very safe because bishops are protecting him, and the game is just lost. Queen h3, the last trick, if king goes to c2, there is rook c8, but king can go back to e2 or knight g3. And if you take on g3, there is bishop e5 check. All right, you must take this, and then king g8. Take this first. If king goes back here, check, and you trade the queens, and this material advantage, easy win for white. So, so you cannot take the knight, but if you don't take the knight, then you have to play something like this, and queen takes. And again, king g. Now, if you take on g3, king ranks here. There is no rook c8. It's not protected. So he takes here, rook c8 immediately, but rook h1 counter attack. You cannot take this pawn. Queen d7, centralization, king e3, and black finally at some point he resigns. He is rook down, no compensation. But the result of the game was already pretty clear after bishop f7. So he fought for another 15 moves. So the reason this happened is because Alireza took the risk here. He lost because in this position he is down to 24 minutes to make 12 moves, and he goes and plays for a win, where only white can play for a win. Yeah, he should have taken the draw, right? So, and the last game was surprisingly sudden. Yeah, Sicilian was e5. This is more than a reaction to Orsolimo, considered to be good for black. There have been a lot of games by Nakamura, Magnus, and Fabiano in this line. White, you know, Fabi is one of the biggest experts in this line, period, since he's matched versus Magnus Carlsen. So let's see what he does. He just goes into the quiet positional line. You know, he's playing Kapasov. And Fabi is very strong in the long strategic games, so he's playing to his strength. Kapasov is actually very good in the open games, open positions. I mean, he's good in tactics. So Fabiano takes the game into the area where he's stronger and his opponent is not as strong. So very nice decision. So bishop e7, queen e3. White prepares to move the knight from h4 now that he got this sort of weakness, yeah, dark squares. And the knight is going back and also preparing for f4, which is standard idea for white. Black trades the bishops. But now this structure with some weaknesses here, double pawns here, is a little bit better for white. b6, and now 5e plays for a3, b4 plan, trying to create weaknesses here. Black is trying to, you know, control everything, and all he has to do is to play knight e6 or g5, and black will be fine. But, you know, knight b3 is a threat to attack the pawn, so bishop e6 must be played, and f4. Black has no time to play g5. After this f4, white opens the files. Black pawns become more vulnerable, and also the king, okay, because he's a little bit open. Still, black is doing okay. Okay, I mean, like, he's worse, but he has a chance to defend this position. Rook d8 is good. White piles up on this pawn, but black can protect it. So the question is how white can improve his position. You know, black is very solid, like he's protecting squares, not so easy to play. The question is like, what to do with this guy? Yeah, this guy is not playing, and as you guys know in my streams, I usually say that you need to look for ways to improve your piece, which is least functional. Okay, so, and there it is, b4, striking the critical squares. White is fighting for the control over these squares. If knight ever gets to c5, black is strategically lost. Okay. The point is, if you take on b4, there is this e5 thing, attacking the queen. Pawn gets to f6, and it's immediate loss for black, because then the king is like going under the mating attack, and knight goes to g5, f6. So you cannot take this pawn. So what are you going to do? You're going to try to play something like this, which Abbas does. King h1. The only incorrect move in the game, knight f3, should have been played with the idea of knight d4, forcing the bishop to retreat so the knight can go to b3, c5. But it is reasonable. He wants to avoid the potential queen trade. If black manages to trade the queens, then black is probably okay. But now black gets rid of the weaknesses. Yeah. This was very surprising. Yeah, you should definitely take with the rook here, and not be afraid of queen b6, because, you know, even if you're pawn down but you get active pieces, the worst thing scenario for black is you will end up in a 3 versus 4 rook endgame, which is a draw. Okay, but now black gets active position, and black will be able to trade one pair of rooks. Again, I think it was a better decision than playing c5. So black has made a strategic mistake here to leave this pawn alive. Okay, because now in order to take this pawn, you must commit serious resources, like doubling the rooks, which is not that good. Take. I expect knight takes, but okay, pawn takes. And now this is absolutely critical position. This is where black goes wrong. Okay, he plays this move, and after this move, one move, and black is just much worse. All right, so the question is how to deal. You really want to take this pawn, and you want to keep these pawns alive. All right. So the question is, if you play king here and f4, then just queen c3. White protects his pawns, and the knight goes to e4. Black is worse. Okay. So you really need to take the c4 pawn. So how do you do that? And probably that is the answer, because if you cannot protect this pawn now. Yeah. If rook goes, then bishop c4, you win a tempo, you don't have time for rook f5. So white now has to play something. The computer says knight c5. The human way would be to play knight d2. But now you don't have to worry about, now your rook is active. So, and there is some queen a7, queen c3, rook b4. And this pawn is active, and most importantly, your pawn is here, and this knight does not get here. All right. So this was a critical moment. As we can see, Abbaso actually had time to think here, but he played pretty carelessly. He played this first and allowed white to get his queen to e3 actually, yeah, to attack this guy. So rook c8 probably was better, but yeah, this is interesting. Rook d1 I think is good. Because same idea, bishop c4, rook f5. With the open king like that, you cannot allow this file to be opened. And then white prepares queen c3, rook d6. Again, extra pawn for white. Okay, extra pawn is huge. What did he do? He played here after rook f5, and black is just much worse now. Much worse because this king is open, the rooks are coming, the queens, a lot of heavy pieces are playing. Abasov counted that this will be good, but this is huge threat. He has to play. And if rook a7, this rook or this rook, there's e6. Rook goes to f7, and black king is in the mating zone. Okay, so that was incredible. Actually, just one mistake on his part, and the game is over. And he resigns because, yeah, because queen c2, queen b7, the rook is here. Yeah, so black lost in 3 moves, pretty much. See, black is safe, and after this, especially this is the losing move actually. Yeah, you need this bishop to protect the king. And after this, it's just game over completely. So, yeah, in 2 moves, black position just completely collapsed. But that's what happens when you play in the candidates. You play the best players who put the pressure on you. And when they do that, you kind of feel this tension, pressure, and if you don't have this experience of, looking for making good decisions under pressure, then if you don't have the experience, then it's tough. Yeah. So that's why they said that Abasov is going to have a hard time in this tournament, because he doesn't have this experience. He doesn't have the experience of playing all the top tournaments where people put you under pressure and you have to come up with best moves in that situation. All right. He played really well in the World Cup, but that's only just one tournament. Right. And people, when they play in the candidates, they look at your games, they figure out your strengths, your weaknesses, they take everything into account. And black came close to equalizing this game, but there were some nuances that I'm pretty sure Fabi noticed about his opponent, and so he made some decisions based on that knowledge, which proved him correct. And Abasov, made mistakes in a critical position because he really misunderstood the position. Okay. All right. So that was the pretty much recap for the round number 2. I'm going to put it on my YouTube. If you want to read this recap, you can watch it later. And for later games today, we have fantastic lineup. We have Gukish, who just won his game. He's +1 versus Nepo, who just also won his game in the previous round. They play each other, Gukish playing white. So this is the game to watch because these guys are leaders, okay? And Gukish shows that he's in a good form. Both of these guys lost their games in the previous rounds. Nakamura lost an especially painful game because it was with white and it was very humiliating loss. But now he has a chance to come back in his game against Abasov. But there is a lot of psychology here. Yeah, Candidates is also as much about psychology as much about chess playing, right? So I'm pretty sure Abasov understands that Naka is going to try to kill him, but Naka is playing black, right? So he has to equalize first. So here's the chance for Abasov. If they both, they're smart, I would probably suggest they just make a draw, and tomorrow is the rest day, right? So they make a draw, they get some rest today, they get some rest tomorrow, they get those painful losses behind them, and they get back into the tournament. Because -1 is not the end of the story. The guy who is going to win this tournament, he will be +3, okay? That's usually what is the winners of the candidates do, because in the field where everybody plays in a close level, right? Every win is like a huge deal. And I don't think +2 is enough because 8 people, will be competition, but +3 should be enough to win the tournament. So if you're -1, to go from -1 to +2, +3 is still possible, all right? But if you're like losing 2 games, it's not Bobby Fischer versus Kamsky days anymore. Bobby lost first 2 games and then he won like 6 games. Yeah, this is not the same story, right? But of course, as the guy who watches the tournament, who is not playing in the candidates, I want an exciting game. Yeah, I want some fun. I want some blood. Yeah, I understand that. But as the player who played in this stuff before, in events like this before, I can tell you from my experience that the best thing for Naka would be probably to make a draw here, because Abasov is not going to play for a win for sure, because Abasov is going to wait for Naka to take the risk and so he can punish him. All right, so I expect a fighting game, but I don't expect, you know, Abasov to take any risk. I think Naka might take risk, okay? But if he takes risk, he is going to risk another loss. So Alireza versus Fabiano is going to be interesting game. Alireza just came from a loss to Nepo, but he lost with black. Now he's playing with white. But now Alireza is also playing one of the leaders, and of course Fabiano is like the best candidate to win the candidates. So if there is a way to stop your most direct competitor, this is the game. This is the game where Alireza technically he must play for a win, all right? And therein lies the crux of the matter, because if Alireza plays for the win, something goes wrong, and Fabi, like, you know, plays with absolute accuracy, calculation, and determination, and he wins the game with black, then Alireza will be pretty much out of the candidates race. Yeah. So in order to stay in the candidates, Alireza will have to play challenging chess, but again, not to take too much risk like he did in the previous game, right? The previous game showed me that he is not in his best form also. So when you realize you're not in the best form, you have to be cautious, right? So Fabi, he is gonna try to come up. Fabi right now is in a good form, right? So he's gonna try to do the thing where he draws the game into a complex zone, just like Nepo did yesterday, and tries to sort of provoke Alireza into playing chess, right? Into playing exciting chess, and stabilize sort of on Alireza a little bit problem with tactics these days, all right? So, or he can just go make a draw with black and just, you know, try to go for a win with white in their second game. Yeah. So probability is that I think it's a draw, and somebody wins. Is probability there, but it's not as high. And of course, this game, Vidit versus Prague, two guys who know each other perfectly. Prague is not in good form, but today he's going to try to be very solid. He's going to try to make a draw, and Vidit is going to have a hard time breaking this defense. So I expect a draw in this game, but it will be a fight. So among these games, I am hoping that Gukish versus Nepo will be the most exciting game, I think, because they're fighting for the lead, these guys. Not a lot of people thought that Gukish would do well in this tournament. I said that, you know, he is unpredictable. If he plays well, then he does well. Yeah. If he is in bad form, then he doesn't do well. But so far, I like what I see. Okay, I like what I see from Gukish, and I really wish, you know, him to do well here. Okay, and that's it, guys. That's the recap for round 2 and predictions for round 3. And I'll see you guys in a bit. Thank you for staying.